field of volleyball dahil uso na po ngayon ang volleyball, no? Dahil sa panalo natin sa tournament na ito, makakatulong din tayo sa ating chosen beneficiary, ang ating Senate Spouses Foundation Incorporated, led by Ma'am Audrey Zubiri. Nakakataba po ng puso na sa ating panalo ay may matutulungan po tayo. The remarkable silver medal win of the Senate team with the support of all the staff and personnel rallying behind them has brought pride and honor to the esteemed institution. Para po ito sa buong Senado. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Christopher Bongo. Congratulations to our silver medalist. Next year, dapat try natin yung gold. Dagdagan daw ng budget, Mr. Secretary, sabi niya.
Mr. President,
Yes, please.
may I be allowed, Mr. President, to just give a short co-sponsorship speech, Mr. President?
Yes, please proceed.
Mr. President, we are proud and privileged to be co-sponsor of proposed Senate Resolution number 934, congratulating and commending our Senate Lady Defenders team for their outstanding performance in the first season of UNTV Volleyball League. They represented our institution, Mr. President, in the league among other government agencies and achieved the extraordinary feat of winning the silver medal. Mr. President, as an athlete myself, we truly enjoy and admire seeing the determination, passion, and discipline exhibited by our fellow athletes here in the Senate, and even more so, Mr. President, when their sportsmanship is further accompanied by their desire to help others for a cause. Kaya naman po natutuwa tayo sa statement ng kanilang team captain ni Senate Legislative Staff Officer Jamie Lynn Dili-Dili. Manalo ka kahit ano yung maging place mo dyan, makakatulong ka pa rin. Tunay po na naisabuhay, Mr. President, ng Senate Lady Defenders ang diwa ng paglilingkod sa ating bayan. Muli, sinasamahan po natin ang principal author of the measure, Senator Bongo, para i-congratulate ang ating Lady Defenders and Senate staff team. Pinangungunahan ni Captain Dili-Dili, Marla Katrina Carandang, Candice Cerezo, Karina Deliosa, Jamie Lynn Dili-Dili, Marvian Felipe, Famirexi Galyares, Rachel Inid, Mary Joy Ojo, Joanne Pangilinan, Ellen Pantanosas, Francia Torres Roque, and Jessica Vinluan, alongside import players Jewel Hannah Lai, Catherine Villegas, Marishila Cecilio, and Grace Falabrica, and Coach Roger Gorayev. Mabuhay po kayo at muli sa inyong mga kasamahan dito sa Senado, we are proud of you. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo, and may God bless us all. Mr. President, Senator Revilla would also like to insert into the records, Mr. President, his co-sponsorship speech.
Yes, we take note of that.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, no member wish. Mr. President, Senator Jinggoy Estrada would also like to insert into the records his co-sponsorship speech.
We take note of that.
Mr. President, no member wishes to interpolate or ask any questions in the proposed propose any amendments to this particular measure. I now move that we adopt proposed Senate Resolution number 934, subject to stamp, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the motion is approved. The resolution is hereby adopted.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that all members of the Senate be made authors of this resolution.
We take note of that, dear colleague.
Mr. President, may I ask for a minute suspension?
Before we proceed to a minute suspension, we're also going to, I'll be making a donation to the POC, a personal donation, on their golf tournament, which is going to benefit the athletes that are leaving for Paris Olympics. So I'll request the Secretary, your two top, kasi we'll have two top golf players. Meron pa tayong mga galing na golfers dito sa Senado, golf team para mapadala natin dun sa tournament na yan. So we now like to, meron ba dito sa mga senador na magaling sa golf? Bong? Ibang golf? Ibang holes?
Golf.
One hole therefore, to allow the sentinels to come up here to take their resolution, the defenders, we pause for 1 Senate minute.
At this juncture, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2572 under Committee Report number 209. This is the bill on the Bulacan Airport City Special Economic Zone and Freeport Act. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, resumption of consideration on Senate Bill number 2572 under Committee Report number 209 is now in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are still in the period of interpellations and debate, and so with the consent of the body, I move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the distinguished sponsor of the measure, the distinguished lady from the great province of Pangasinan, Iloilo, and city of San Juan, no other than Senator Grace Poe, whose husband is celebrating his birthday today. Happy birthday to Idol Neil. And to interpellate our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros. So move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, resumption of period of interpellation is now in order. Senators Poe and Ontiveros are hereby recognized.
Salamat, Mr. President, and with birthday greetings to the beloved of our good sponsor, may I ask some questions about the Bulacan Eco Zone?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to thank the Majority Leader for putting on record the special day of my husband. It means a lot to me also. This is the first time in my almost 12 years in the Senate that he's been mentioned. And thank you also to, on the floor. So thank you. We
He is a hero, Mr. President.
Mr.
No,
President, should I interpolate the meaning of that statement?
You know, I think it's better left not interpolated, but definitely I will admit to him being my better half.
Oh, I join with my sister in that, in
Thank
supporting her in that sweet
Thank
statement.
you also, Senator Risa, for your greeting.
Thank you, good sponsor. So,
I wonder who my real friends are here in the Senate. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. President, good sponsor. So, unang mga tanong po, ano yung costs? The President's July 22 veto message mentioned that the National Economic and Development Authority and the Regional Development Council 3 assert the need to, quote, thoroughly study and assess the costs to ensure that the establishment of the economic zone would be beneficial to the whole country, close quote. In other words, though the President seems to have questioned the wisdom of that version of the bill establishing the Bulacan Eco Zone, he himself remained open and willing to be convinced if a thorough enough cost-benefit analysis could inform decision-making and complement guesses and subjective judgments. Kaya, ano yung costs ng measure na ito? Halimbawa, in terms sa foregone tax revenues dahil sa pagpapababa ng income taxes para sa registered companies, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, both NEDA and the DOF on the foregone taxes haven't really submitted to us, although we've asked for that position, even position paper, even during the past. But right now, there are no big industries that pay regular corporate income taxes and generate employment in that area. Most of Bulacan, the city, and Bulacan, the province where the Aero City is located, has been overrun by flood and rainwater. The rest of the areas are either flooded communities, idle farmlands, or residential areas. Obviously, there's no revenue to be lost, but a lot to be gained once investors are attracted to come to the Bulacan Eco Zone due to the development. Is it the rationale of the passage of the CREATE law to attract more investors in the Philippines by giving them business incentives such as income tax, holidays, and special corporate income tax? What is being envisioned here in terms of tax incentives is nothing beyond what has already been envisioned under CREATE. The creation of the Bulacan Eco Zone and its IPA is just another platform to attract those investors. In consultation, informal consultations with the DOF and the project developer, Secretary Recto himself opined that at this time, a cost-benefit analysis cannot be done because at the moment, there's nothing in the proposed Bulacan Eco Zone. There's no cost there because there's nothing there yet.
Alright. Salamat, good sponsor. Pero balikan ko rin yung sinabi nyo rin that both NEDA and DOF haven't really submitted the full cost-benefit analysis. Kasi dun din natin mas matetest kung hanggang create lang but nothing beyond that. And therefore, pwede na tayong conclusively magsabi, no revenues will be lost, at least in terms of lowered income taxes. So, ngayon, ano yung costs naman nitong measure in terms ng future infrastructure na kakailanganin para i-address yung congestion, para i-secure yung perimeters, para siguruhin yung kagalingan ng mga migrant workers, at para siguruhin din na hindi na magpatuloy at hindi na maulit yung pagbaha ng ecozone na binanggit din ng good sponsor ngayon lamang.
Well, the objective of the proposal is to be proactive and prepare the surrounding communities for development that will be brought by the construction and operation of the ecozone. The said authority, whose board of directors will be composed of representatives of several government agencies, the Office of the President, will have a master plan on how the surrounding communities will prepare and react to the development coming from the airport and the airport city. Additionally, the creation of the ecozone does not mean that these areas will no longer be serviced by the national government agencies and LGUs. So there are major projects that will need funding. There will be easy coordination among the agencies. Now, initially, there is an investment of 20 billion in capital stock that the government will give that in the next 5 years. This will not be given immediately. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, SBMA, the 20 billion capitalization passed in 1992, has yet to be fully paid 32 years later. On the other hand, Mr. President, obviously, for the investors here, they would like to put up the capex, at least the basic roads, etc. That will be out of pocket for them, but the local government will still benefit because building permits, business permits will still go through the LGUs. Hindi naman mawawalan ng income yung mga local government doon. In fact, they will benefit pa nga additionally kasi they don't have to come up with the capital to build the roads, to build the infrastructure in the ecozone.
Thank you, good sponsor. And naglulook forward din ako dun sa master plan kung saan siguro mas maididetalye yung costs or yung necessary budgets para dito sa iba't ibang bahagi ng tanong ko, both to address current and recurring problems tulad ng pagbabaha at para i-preempt din yung mga anticipated possible problems tulad ng congestion at yung mga pangangailangan na nga ng migrant workers. Just for the record also, Mr. President, good sponsor, tungkol dun sa tanong na ito on cost-benefit analyses. Cost-benefit analyses are done using scenarios and based on comparisons with other zones. So, we're not starting from scratch here with the Bulacan Ecozone, pero ipaghahambing din natin, compare and contrast sa mga nauna ng ecozones.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. President.
that's actually true also what our colleague has mentioned. We will ask for the expenses that they had for CAPEX, let's say with AFAB and Clark. But again, we have to realize that this will be done over time. So we can submit to your office, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, good sponsor, Mr. President. Ano naman yung costs ng measure na ito in terms ng paggarantya sa mga utang na ifo-float ng ecozone? Mr. President.
Mr. President, there are no guarantees. We're not going to, the government will give a cap. The Board of Directors of the Bulacan Eco Authority, composed of representatives from the Office of the President, NEDA, DOF, DTI, RDC, among others, will ensure that government guarantees will be issued only when necessary and will follow all the requirements under existing law, and most importantly, if the authority can afford it. Remember, in this bill, we already incorporated that COA will actually be given the powers to audit every step of the way. Unlike in the last version of the bill, which was also one of the reasons why it was vetoed, there's no specific role COA was going to play.
Salamat para doon, good sponsor. Importante din hina-highlight yung naging papel ng COA in this new and improved version of the original bill. Pero yung binanggit ninyo na debts or loans, debts may be floated or issued only when necessary. Na-spell out na po ba yung mga criteria ng necessity na iyon?
Section 13H.
From Section 13H, raise or borrow within the limitation provided by law and subject to the approval of the Monetary Board of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas as the case may be. Adequate and necessary funds from local or foreign sources to finance its project and programs under this act, and for this purpose, to issue bonds, promissory notes, and other forms of securities, and to secure the same by guarantee, pledge, mortgage, deed of trust, or an assignment of all or part of its property or assets.
So merong pong at least guaranteed pledge mortgage. May estimate na po ba sa cost niyan o sa value niyan? Kasi sa kaso po halimbawa ng Maharlika Fund, isang GOCC, sinabi po natin nung ipinasa natin yung batas tungkol dyan na hindi magkakaroon ng mga guarantee. So usually pag GOCC, magkakaroon ng guarantees. And kababanggit lang nga na mayroong guarantee pledge mortgage. So what is the cost of that, good sponsor?
Well, we don't really know yet the cost unless something is actually tangible and the guarantee is already issued. On the other hand, we can supply the office of our colleague a copy of what the laws are which pertains to government guarantees.
Salamat, good sponsor. The good sponsor also mentioned that any debts floated will be under existing laws and if the eco zone can afford it. Pero importante pa rin klaruhin talaga itong issue ng, in a way, sovereign guarantees.
Mr. President, also just a clarificatory. As you know, the PPP law, I believe our assistant
Presiding
majority
officer.
leaders, the main sponsor of that, has actually limitations on what the government will guarantee. So, part of that is also the explanation of to what point the government will intervene when it comes to the loans, but definitely it will need approval by the Bangko Central's Monetary Board, and also there should be deeds and also mortgages that will be able to guarantee the payment of the loan.
Salamat, good sponsor. PPP din po ba ito, yung Bulacan Eco Zone?
It is not strictly a PPP,
yes.
but definitely there are private investors.
Yes.
But BACSESFA in itself is an agency, so we're empowering them to grant the rights for the tax-free area. But once there are relocators there could be partnerships for PPP infrastructure, etc., within the eco zone.
And salamat, good sponsor. I stand corrected. The airport is a PPP, pero yung eco zone po ay hindi. So I would withdraw that question. It would have been, in a way, at least for this particular question, it would have been helpful kung PPP nga siya dahil gaya nga po ng sinabi ng good sponsor sa PPP law, may mga limitasyon tayong ibinigay sa government guarantees. In any case po, gaano karaming equity at saka infrastructure ang ire-require sa national government sa susunod na 5 taon? Ang magnitude po ba niya ay magiging katulad nung 20 billion pesos in capital stock in the next 5 years, Mr. President?
Yes, while the bill asks for 20 billion in authorized capital stock, this does not have to be a one-time release of cash, but it in the form of assets and other properties contributed by the government, capitalized surplus, cash contributions, and budgetary outlay. So, hindi naman sabay-sabayan. The said amount can be released over a period of time, Mr. President.
And that amount, good sponsor, is 20 billion pesos.
20 billion, the same guarantee that was given in 1992 for SBMA. Ito na nga, ilang years na, no? Inflation na, hindi pa rin tumaas. Oo. At hindi pa rin bayad yung sa SBMA.
Okay, salamat, good sponsor. Yung Ecozone po ba magbabayad para sa sarili niyang personnel at sarili niyang operations costs para sa ilang employees? At yun ba mas marami kaysa sa Subic o Clark? Magkano din ba ang gastos nung dalawang iyon sa staffing at contractual personnel at service providers para sa mga operasyon nila?
Yes, it will. The Bulacan Ecozone authorities envision to be self-sustaining, like the other existing zones, ecozones, such as Subic, Clark, and Bataan. So, maybe panimula, no? Kaya nga meron tinatawag na authorized capital stock na 20 billion. Panimula lamang yon. Tapos, syempre, pag may mga nagre-relocate, may mga binabayaran ng mga fees, makakayanan na. And I have no doubt that this will be the case kasi the major investment there is really the airport in itself. And Ecozone or not, actually, that will attract businesses in that area. But even more so with an economic zone.
I see. Mga ilang empleyado kaya magkakaroon? Is there an estimate or a projection?
Actually, alam mo, Mr. President, for sure in the thousands, just by the area, which is 55,000 hectares. So, yun na.
Ang Subic ma'am started very small by 30 years after 3,000.
Okay, Subic started small. We don't know the exact figure, but right now there are about 3,000 direct employees. On the other hand, the projected employees or employable because of this ecozone and the downstream industry can actually reach in the millions in the future.
Ang Subic ma'am, when the Americans left, directly employs 20,000. Ngayon ma'am, ang Subic directly employs up to 200.
Millions, good sponsor? Kasi parang ang laking geometric progression from 3,000 sa Subic.
300,000.
So,
160,000.
3 decimal places to the millions.
Yeah, because kung iisipin kasi ninyo, no, pag maglalagay doon, tapos kunyari may hotel, yung nagtatrabaho sa hotel, yung supplier doon ng mga goods, yung pati yung mga tindahan ng mga naroroon, napakabilis po. Plus yung nagtatrabaho rin sa airport, lahat yan is within the economic zone.
Yung Clark po, ilan ang direct employees? Kung 3,000 sa Subic.
163 plantilla positions for Clark.
For Clark, there are 563 plantilla positions.
Alright. So, sa Clark, nasa magnitude ng hundreds ang employees, sa Subic nasa thousands. Pero ganun pa rin ang projection ng good sponsor, Mr. President, na posibleng umabot ang employees in the millions dito sa
Well,
Bulacan
we're
Ecozone.
talking
Baka
about
kasama na po yung locators doon.
Kasama na yung locators doon.
Okay,
Pero,
okay.
syempre, di ba, lahat yan may plus-plus eh. Suppliers sa locators, pati na rin yung mga nasa paligid ng mga lugar. So, I'll just say, maybe not directly employed. Maybe I should correct myself. And those who will directly benefit and indirectly benefit.
Okay. Pero siguro, moving forward, Mr. President, good sponsor, useful din malaman ilang direct employees magkakaroon ang Ecozone. Also because, just for the record, good sponsor, ang Subic at ang Bulacan are, in terms of area, more or less the same size. So good comparison po ito, kahit itanong yung ibang mga factors tulad ng employment. Kaysa sa yung AFAB halimbawa. So mas comparable area-wise, size-wise ang Subic at ito namang Bulacan Ecozone. So again, and moving forward, useful din siguro malaman magkano yung magiging gastos or magkano yung gastos ng Subic in particular, dahil comparable nga dito sa Bulacan Eco Zone, sa staffing niya, at pati na rin sa contractual services and personnel para sa operations nila.
Yeah, Mr. President, we will submit that
Salamat po.
the response to that if we have it. But definitely, I think Subic is big at 65,000 hectares, but most of them are environmentally protected. Mga gubat bundok na hindi pwede talagang i-develop. Dito sa Bulacan, 55,000, but, well, of course, subject to DNR approval, no? Pero unlike, may protected areas talaga doon sa Subic.
Okay. Salamat, Mr. President. And so these are just the costs, Madam Sponsor. I think we also need to have good estimates of the benefits. Kaya nga, nagsimula ako magtanong nung cost-benefit analysis na iniintay pa natin mula sa NEDA at saka sa DOF. Estimate nung benefits din, good estimates of the benefits, based, for example, on the performance of, yun na nga po, our other eco zones, Subic, Clark, na pareho ring may ports at saka airports. Ngayon, balikan ko yung cost-benefit analysis. During the recent committee hearings, the DOF informed the chair that they have done a cost-benefit analysis and it was then nearly finished. I think we should wait for that analysis, Mr. President, good sponsor. Dahil nga, in the realm of the possible, baka hindi sulit na eco zone ang gastusan. You didn't mention this DOF study in your replies to the minority leaders' March 5 interpellations. So I'm assuming that DOF probably hasn't submitted it yet. And I would certainly like to go through that cost-benefit analysis before I conclude my interpellation. So, and even if we don't reopen committee hearings again, though, of course, in the realm of the possible, that would always be an option, I would like to request a presentation and a study caucus. Kasama po sana kayo, Madam Sponsor, at ang authors natin na sina Madjo at SP at yung iba pang committee members. Because, for example, the study might inform us na baka pwedeng sa dagdag na create fiscal at non-fiscal incentives na lang ng mga Bulacan at Central Luzon investors direktang ilagay ang pera. Or the study might say that the Bulacan Eco Zone plan really makes sense. Or it might say, sa DOF study lang that it is not prudent. Typically, it's NEDA that does this, and it's also NEDA that pointed out the need for a thorough study of the costs. Kaya, instead of doing its own study, parang magkadoble pa, DOF, NEDA, pwede po kaya ang NEDA sumali na lang sa atin kapag pinresent na ng DOF finally yung kanilang cost-benefit analysis.
Mr. President, we're already at the period of interpellation.
Yes.
And I feel that we are we're not just relying here on NEDA and DOF. In fact, in the past, they've always caused the bottleneck. And I think, for me, this is just really common sense. That area has not much to offer right now. And the government is jumping in to develop it, but it is because already of the risk taken by a private sector investor to build an airport. We've already seen what's happening in NAIA now. Because the area around it wasn't planned, even if the government spends billions of pesos there, you can never rectify it at this point. Because right-of-way issues will always be an issue. And the local government officers themselves have already said that we want this. We want this in our province. So are we going to play hostage again to NEDA? Isn't this the mandate of Congress to also be able to decide what will be best for our country and our constituents? So, Mr. President, while I appreciate the meticulous nature of our colleague here, and she wants all of these submissions, I believe at this point we are already running out of time. This Congress is about to end, and I will stand firm on my belief that there's been enough studies here and abroad and examples that have proven that eco zones at least provide employment. I've already in my speech given an example of the Shannon zone
Ecozone.
in Ireland. We have the Incheon Airport in Korea. We keep complaining that Vietnam is overtaking us because they act so quickly. And we have all of these bottlenecks, again, ironically, from the agency that is supposed to harness and to provide economic development. So if you would like to meet with them, please feel free. We will submit to you what we have.
Thank you, good sponsor. And I share the good sponsor's impatience, but more than her
Not
impatience,
impatience.
also the need.
It's more like my stand, my strong
Yes.
stand with regards to this matter.
Yes. I meant, Mr. President, impatience with those agencies on whom we are relying to timely submit these important cost-benefit analyses. And maybe the Senate Economic Policy Office could also weigh in on when, hopefully, before we conclude interpellations, NEDA and DOF can finally submit those cost-benefit analyses for
Mr.
the
President,
probable value they could add to
If I
our
may also add,
discussions.
in 2016, after the last administration, there was already a proposal to rehabilitate the Ninoy Aquino International Airport. 2017, they did submit an unsolicited proposal with all the different companies, the biggest companies in the Philippines, joining in together called the consortium. Inupuan ng ewan ko, NEDA, whatever. It took forever. Finally, 2017 yun
Yes.
no decision. 2019, tapos 2020 nagka-COVID. Can you imagine if we allowed them, even in 2019, during the COVID, when there was not much activity of travel,
Yes.
NAIA would have been rehabilitated. Ngayon, kung sasabihan, pero mabuti naghintay tayo kasi tinan mo ngayon, 86% ng profit ibibigay sa gobyerno. Yeah, but the lost time that we had and the reputation that we act so slowly, sometimes you bite the bullet already, knowing what you will be able to benefit from. Parang people being stranded, being overtaken by other countries because progress here is so slow. So, Mr. President, kaya minsan dalang-dala na rin ako sa mga intayin natin ang submission, they are not directly answerable to our constituents. We are.
Yes, very well taken, good sponsor. I also wish na we could have used yung almost lost years na iyon ng pandemic to address not just the NAIA problem but a host of other problems para we could have had more capacities at our disposal ngayon that we are finally emerging from the pandemic and from the pandemic economic effects. Just a last question before I move on to a different topic, Mr. President, good sponsor, on these on the benefit of timely cost-benefit analyses that should come in to advise us further. Aren't there eco zones that have failed? Do we want to risk funding an eco zone that might not make economic sense as in the President's veto? But this is for the previous bill. So just as a last question dito sa costs and cost-benefit analyses, are there eco zones that have failed, Mr. President?
Mr. President, I wouldn't say it's a complete failure. I know there are some eco zones. I don't want to quote exactly the eco zone, but I remember when I was doing conducting the budget on some eco zones that are still relying on subsidies. So in short, they are still waiting for the subsidies that were initially promised them. So they couldn't stand on their own 2 feet yet. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the Zamboanga Eco Zone in particular. And Cagayan also. But let's remember also that these two zones, although spur economic growth in that area, is also far from Metro Manila and the National Capital Region. So it's understandable that the gestation period for the realization of the full potential is a little longer.
And it's also good, I think, good sponsor, Mr. President, to learn our lessons, not just from the success stories, but also not outright failures or the delayed or the slower burning eco zones, and which I think was also the value, although the value of the lessons we've tried to learn from the president's veto and the grounds for these, which were interpellated by the good minority leader. So, good sponsor, moving on to a different topic, kung ano yung impact sa Clark. So one of the reasons for the presidential veto of the bill, the first bill, was the eco zone's proximity to the Clark Economic Zone. So it was not a surprise that when the president vetoed the Bulacan Airport Special Economic Zone and Freeport bill, the Clark Development Corporation, CDC, responded positively, stating that, quote, the decision was a significant boost to the development of the Clark Special Economic and Freeport Zone, close quote. So the CDC, which manages the Clark Zone, saw the veto as beneficial to their efforts in attracting investments, as the proposed Bulacan Eco Zone was less than 60 kilometers away from their location. So, ang ibig ba nilang sabihin noon at ang sinabi ba ng presidente noon ay yung Eco Zone ay redundancy dahil magsiserve siya ng eksaktong parehong layunin sa Region 3 ng Clark?
Yes, initially that was part of the veto, Mr. President. On the other hand, now I think Clark has submitted its position paper that they are already supporting it because they believe that it will be complementary to the functions also of the economic zone of Clark. As mentioned also by our minority leader, one of the things that was asked, are they going to develop casinos or gambling places? No, it's not in the plan of the Bulacan Eco Zone, and in fact, it's explicit in their in the bill. On the other hand, also, Mr. President, di ba pag nagtatayuan nga ng mga mall, minsan nagkakadikit-dikit na. Pero kasi parang captive audience na. Kunyari, you're a company that relocates in the Philippines. You want the expertise of one area, but you don't want to put your eggs in one basket. You also have, but it's not exactly so far that it will be so impractical to maintain. So, meron namang ganun. Pwede ka magpatayo ng pabrika dito that will do semiconductors, pero dito naman, yung processing na para ma-export na agad, yung more on the finishing of the product. So, I think competition is actually good, and in this case, it will be complementary.
Okay, salamat, good sponsor. And bago sinubmit ng CDC yung kanilang position paper, ang committee ba nag-solicit ng mga komento mula din sa BCDA at sa CDC rin?
Okay. Well, actually, we're still waiting for the position of BCDA. For now, this was kasi initially they were okay with the veto. So hopefully now we will wait for their position. Maybe they're more enlightened. But yes, they are against it. They submitted the position paper that deemed the Bulacan Eco Zone as creating unnecessary competition to the government's policy developing viable special economic zones, which is ironic kasi mas malayo pa nga yung BCDA. I mean, yung mas malayo pa nga ang, I'm sorry, mas malayo pa yung mas malapit ang Subic sa Clark. Pero ang Subic yung against. Diba? BCDA pala yung okay. Sorry. Yeah, BCDA is against it.
I see.
But Clark and Subic are supportive.
With the indulgence of the two ladies.
Yes, Mr. President.
I would support the position of the chair because I think it will be complementary, especially with when the North-South commuter line becomes online. We will have more growth areas or growth nodes, no, and it will be complementary. especially when our railway and other transport services become online.
Salamat, Mr. President. And that gives a good example of yung isang matagal nang ina-advocate ng NEDA, and I would have expected kung nag-submit sila timely ng cost-benefit analysis, has been advocating yung ano ba ito, transport-oriented development na along the rails, more and varied economic activities are spurred, and probably including eco zones as one of those forms. So, pasensya na sa kakulitan ko about the cost-benefit analysis of NEDA and DOF. I hope they will come in before we conclude our interpellations and amendments, so that they can bring in additional value added, as they should, as their agencies should.
Hindi, kasi,
yes,
Mr.
good sponsor.
President, ako naman kasi, pag makita mo, kunyari, empty yung land, or kung ano man yung mga ibang kalat-kalat na mga maliliit na business, tapos merong mamumuhunan ng gobyerno, maglalagay doon ng karsada, maglalagay ng eco zone, tapos may airport na doon, parang no-brainer na eh. Parang iniintay mo lang ba talaga yung NEDA study para mapatunayan na kailangan natin yan. Para kang merong kusina na walang laman, gagastos ka para lagyan ng laman, pero kakainin mo rin naman yon, di ba? Parang, kailangan mo pa bang pag-aralan yon na detalyado ng galing pa sa NEDA? May mga ibang pag-aaral na. But yes, just to be sure that we have that, we will certainly convey to NEDA that
Salamat,
this is
good
something
sponsor.
that we would appreciate to have. But the power should not rest on NEDA alone.
And in fact,
I
and
believe we are
thank-
given the mandate to also have discretion on what we believe will be better for the country.
And Mr. President, salamat sa good sponsor for committing to communicate it again. I'm sure it won't be the first time to NEDA and DOF. She used a term that precisely points out na para po sa representation ito, the controlling factor here is not the date of submission of NEDA and DOF, but yung procedure natin dito sa interpellation and amendment in plenary, that I'm still hoping those cost-benefit analysis will come in timely, so within the period of our deliberations. And especially because cost-benefit analysis is a science, and we need their numbers to further improve the bill. So yes, once more to the good sponsor, thank you for committing to, again, try to secure the DOF study. And as the good sponsor mentioned earlier, I will invite NEDA to comment if DOF can make a presentation, and I'll be sure to document the findings and share them with all our colleagues, most importantly,
Actually,
with the
Mr.
good
President,
sponsor.
I think it will be very timely also. I believe the gentlewoman from Capiz is a member of the Commission on Appointments. So we will have the Department of Finance Secretary candidate, a former colleague. We can ask directly from him how he views this undertaking.
Thank you. That's a very good and timely point. So the next part of my brief manifestation, I'll bring it up with the Secretary Ralph Recto. That I'm also hoping that the cost-benefit analysis of the DOF would say something about the Clark Eco Zone, because that's how DOF or any agency properly should conduct a cost-benefit analysis. You study the Bulacan Eco Zone, and you study alternative uses for the financial resources that might also achieve the same objective of attracting investors and connecting to local economies in central and northern Luzon.
Mr.
And-
President,
yes,
we
Mr.
will
President.
submit the cost-benefit analysis made by PEZA on Clark and whatever other eco zones.
Salamat, good sponsor, for that. And then, speaking of something that the presiding officer just mentioned, because there is already a rail connection to Metro Manila and even from southern Luzon to Clark, good sponsor, and because prospective locators in Clark, like everywhere else, complain of high electricity costs, might be a good idea to also request the DOF team to also do a cost-benefit analysis for an alternative scenario, parallel to, on the side of, not as the controlling factor, but parallel to our plenary deliberations. The alternative scenario would be one where DOE and ERC and PPP programs that the good sponsor and I just talked about briefly, that would accelerate and render bankable, low-cost, renewable energy projects could be supported financially and could have advanced implementation in the Clark Eco Zone. And so if DOF and NEDA haven't yet done an alternatives analysis, pwede kaya nating i-request din na gawin nila ito, good sponsor.
Manage expectations, Mr. President. Of
Fair
course,
enough.
ako, actually, mas napipikon ako talaga pag naiisip ko yung mga submissions nila eh. Kasi talagang doon nagbabara lahat ng maraming mga ibang proyekto na leaves us so frustrated. Anyway, okay, yes, we will ask.
Salamat, good sponsor. Moving now to LGU, board representation. During the committee hearing, Bulacan LGUs asked for extra representation in the board. Hindi kaya tinitignan ito ng chair, itong appeal na reasonable, considering na yung mga local ordinances ay ma-overwrite ng issuances ng Eco Zone via yung provision sa Section 25 na nagsasabi, quote, in case of conflict among the BACSESFA and the LGUs on matters directly and inextricably affecting the Bulacan Eco Zone, other than taxation, national defense, and security matters, the decision of the BACSESFA shall prevail. And then there's also this other provision saying that, quote, BACSESFA shall establish under it a land use, planning, and development office or unit to craft, revise, and implement the framework. Local, regional, and national plans for the uses and development of the areas covered by the Bulacan Eco Zone shall be consistent with the framework established by the BACSESFA. So, hindi kaya reasonable yung magkaroon daw sila ng extra representation sa board, yung mga Bulacan LGUs, Mr. President, good sponsor.
A governing body with too many members can become unwieldy, Mr. President. Difficult to convene due to its many members. The representatives from the various national agencies and the LGU should be enough kasi they cannot naman unilaterally decide. Remember, there's a member that's designated by the President, the Secretary of the DOF, DTI, the NEDA, in fact, the Secretary of the DNR. Yan, mga members na man lahat yan. So, always, diba, the national interest in certain cases will supersede certain local concerns. On the other hand, as mentioned, it will coincide with the development plan of each of those different provinces within the zone. That's the guarantee. I mean, if ever it doesn't really coincide, there has to be a reason that's of national interest that will be able to supersede that.
Well, Mr. President, sang-ayon naman ako sa good sponsor na kung masyado namang malaki ang isang governing body, pwede ngang maging unwieldy. Pero din, ang isang right-sized na governing body na maaring kulang o pwede pa sanang dagdagan ng kahit kaunti ang representation ng quite a numerous number of stakeholders, parang could be improved in terms of representation. Kasi marami-rami pong Bulacan LGUs would be represented by one LGU representative in the governing body.
Well, Mr. President, yung Subic, Cagayan, Bataan, ganun din ang representation. So, equality in the law. But on the other hand, okay, this is a special, let's say, it's a special arrangement, special zone. I would appreciate it if in the end, during the period of amendment,
Okay.
our colleague can propose something that perhaps to add an additional member from the local government.
I will do that, good
Yes.
sponsor, at the proper time. Salamat para doon. The committee report also says that the board may sell up to 40% of the capital stock of the BACSESFA to the general public under such policy as the board and the Secretary of Finance may determine. Bakit po may ganito tayong provision, Mr. President?
Actually, it's also because we encourage ownership by the private sector, by common investors. As long as, of course, everything within the transaction is transparent and above board, no? It's also important kasi usually when there's stockholders, there's more transparency because you have to report to the board, you have to present an internal audit, etc. So for me, I think it's better than being just controlled by a few or by just one corporation.
Well, speaking of that, Mr. President, posible bang mangyari na a single corporate entity ay pwedeng magmay-ari ng 40% ng capital stock ng Ecozone? Tapos, mangyayari ba na yung may-ari na yon ay magiging entitled sa board representation?
In theory, it can happen. As pointed out, any sale of stock to the public is subject to policy that the board and the Secretary of Finance will determine. As to board representation, the last paragraph 10 states that the sale of shares to the public shall in no manner alter the composition of the BACSESFA board. Because also the government has an investment here, remember? The 20 billion initially. So the proposal does not provide for board representation based on ownership. So being a GOCC, the board composition is based on effective administration and regulation. Thus, the law specifically draws from various NGAs, LGUs, and 3 private sector reps.
Salamat, good sponsor. But of course, dahil posibleng mangyari na 40% ng capital stock ay maging pagmamayari ng isang single corporate entity, hindi po maliit na percentage po yun. It's quite significant for a single entity. So, magandang pag-isipan pa.
Pero napakahirap kasi nila to manipulate to get the entire allotment for public offerings. But okay, I mean, if there's control, 40% is still not a controlling stock. So,
Opo. Napakahirap pero yun na nga, posible. Kaya magandang, isang importanteng palaisipan din. Now, may provision po tayo sa okay. Dako na po ako sa ibang paksa, good sponsor. Yung DENR and OP powers transferred to the Ecozone Authority. May provision po tayo. Any provision of existing laws, ordinances, executive orders, rules, or regulations to the contrary notwithstanding, lands located in Barangay San Nicolas in the municipality of Bulacan, in Barangay Ubihan and Barangay Liputan in the city of Maykawayan, in Barangay Abangan Norte, Barangay Abangan Sur, and Barangay Nagbalon in the municipality of Marilao, and in Barangay Salambao, Barangay Binuangan, Barangay Tawiran, Barangay Paco, Barangay Lawa, Barangay San Pascual, Barangay Paliwas, Barangay Pag-asa, Poblasyon, Barangay Katanghalan, Barangay Panghulo, in the municipality of Obando, are hereby declared as alienable and disposable, and may be used for industrial, commercial, or other lawful uses. Good sponsor, honestly, this sounds like a very sweeping and possibly even dangerous authority, which directly contravenes the committee report's own provision that the DENR shall have full jurisdiction over the Ecozone. Hindi kaya dapat subject sa regulatory determinations ito ng DENR at ibang mga ahensya?
Well, Mr. President, the powers to convert and to reclassify lands lie with Congress as a consequence of its plenary legislative power, while the authority to convert lands has been delegated to the President under CA 141. and its amendments, and the authority to reclassify lands has been delegated to LGUs under RA 7160. Congress retains its plenary legislative powers despite such delegation and may opt to exercise said powers directly. According to the DNR, NAMRIA, there are 4 protected areas within Bulacan, namely Angat Watershed Water District, Biak na Bato, Pantabangan Karanglan, and Angat Watershed and Forest Reserve. These are all located in upland municipalities in Bulacan, Doña Remedios, Trinidad, Angat, and other adjacent upland municipalities. There are no protected areas, national parks in the coastal municipalities and cities of Bulacan, as the forest lands located in coastal Bulacan consisting of mangroves are for fish pond development. The forest lands are classified as such in name only, as almost all of the areas classified as forest lands have long been cleared of mangroves by prior owners and occupants. Therefore, even prior to the commencement of the airport and airport city projects, considering that the said forest lands were classified as forest lands for fish pond development, as shown in videos during my sponsorship speech, all those barangays are underwater, though classified as forest lands. However, since the said areas are still classified as forest lands in the records of the DNR, an act of Congress, the Ecozone Bill, is required to, number 1, convert the said areas to agricultural or alienable and disposable, and 2, to reclassify the allowable uses thereof from fish pond development to commercial, industrial, and or other lawful utilization, and thereby allow the utilization thereof as part of the ecozone. Note that there exists a precedent for the direct exercise by Congress of its plenary power to convert and reclassify lands, as the forest lands in barangays Taliptip and Bambang have previously been converted to agricultural and reclassified to commercial, industrial, and other lawful utilizations under Republic Act Number 11506, the SMAI San Miguel Aero City franchise.
Parang ang daming kailangang i-unpack dyan, Mr. President, good sponsor. Kinikilala ko po yung sinabi ng good sponsor na may mga powers that are recognized or assigned, halimbawa sa atin sa Kongreso, sa Presidente, sa mga LGUs, pero nananatiling distinct pa dyan ang DENR. Parang gusto ko rin itanong, itong mga barangay na in-enumerate ng ating committee report at inulit ko kanina, they're underwater dahil sa baha or pero classified as forest land, pero siguradong settled sila at may economic activities diyan. Isang follow-up question lang muna ngayon, good sponsor. Sinabi po ba ng DENR nung mga hearings na sang-ayon sila sa probisyong ito, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, we wouldn't have moved forward without it.
Salamat, good sponsor. Napapaisip tuloy ako if DENR had not abdicated a little more than it should have, given its overall mandate as the department that it is. And yun na nga, yung kinilala ko yung sinabi ng good sponsor na mayroong mga powers recognized and or assigned to different institutions, different offices, different local bodies. Pero itong wholesale or widespread na pagdeklara na alienable and disposable, notwithstanding ordinances and other instruments of these barangays, para naisama siya sa bill natin on an eco zone, hindi kaya naging more than one subject tuloy yung ating bill. Nung hearings po, tinanong ba ng komite o ng chair yung tungkol sa mga batas, ordinansya, executive orders, at rules and regulations na maaring kontra sa declaration and use of properties in the public domain for industrial and commercial use.
We inserted in the committee report na DNR shall retain powers over the
Well, Mr. President, actually, this is one of the ways we also were able to address the veto. We provided that the DNR shall continue to have primary authority and responsibility on environment protection. Provided further that the monitoring and issuance of leases, permits, certificates, clearances, and all other environment-related issues by the DNR under its mandate shall remain under the jurisdiction of the department. So, even if, let's say, there's already development there, kung merong mga itatayong structure that may be deemed for some reason harmful to the environment, kunyari, I don't know, the processing of certain biohazards that might not be good for the land, of course, the DNR will still have the mandate to disapprove their application.
Nababalik tuloy ako, good sponsor, dun sa sinabi ko kanina na parang itong mahabang probisyon na binasa ko kanina of all those barangays in different municipalities and cities, sabi nga ng good sponsor, classified as forest land, parang directly contravening yung provision naman ng committee report natin na DNR retains primary authority. Kasi kung forest land, so yung primary authority ng DNR sa mga environmental na mga usapin, hindi by common sense, hindi ba dapat siya pa rin yung nangingibabaw?
Kasi nga, Mr. President, yung lugar nga na yon, for some reason, napayagan na rin dati na ma-reclassify yung land at forest lands na natanggal na yung ibang mangroves. I mean, basically, they're not already, it wasn't cared for the way it should have, and therefore, it already changed the composition or how it is now how it should now be classified. There was a direct exercise I mentioned by Congress and its plenary power to convert and reclassify lands as the forest lands in those barangays, Sariptip and Bambang. Now, whether or not that's correct, that's still within the mandate of Congress to do. So, that original ruling should have been questioned.
Salamat, good sponsor. Pag-iisipan ko pa yan lalo, and baka itanong din sa DNR. Kasi nga, minsan, we bite off more than we can chew. Hanggang ngayon, napapaisip ako na baka DNR should have bit off more or kept its jaw clamped down on more of its mandate. I'll leave it at that for now, good sponsor. Pero napaka-interesante nito kasi yun na nga, at the outset, ang daming kailangan pang i-unpack sa kanya. Huling paksa ko na lang po, good sponsor, dahil din sa araw na ito, no? in the interest of time. Yung paksa po ng attachment of the Bulacan Eco Zone to the OP. The committee report says that, quote, in case of any conflict between an NGA within the executive branch and the BACSESFA on matters directly and inextricably affecting the Bulacan Eco Zone, other than taxation, national defense, or security, the decision of the OP shall prevail. Bakit kailangan natin ng ganitong provision, good sponsor, Mr. President?
That's page 9.
The provision is meant to resolve conflict, Mr. President. The Office of the President, being the lead and the executive department, will be tasked to resolve the said conflict. The Bulacan Eco Zone authorities is impliedly under the direct control and supervision of the OP. The same as other eco zones like the Authority Freeport of Bataan and BCDA, which are also all under the direct control and supervision of the OP. In actual practice, the OP mediates, resolves conflicts between SBMA and other NGAs. So, of course, this does not preclude the LGUs and national government agencies options to raise their concern to the proper authorities or to file a case in court.
Doon po ba sa laws governing the other eco zones, may ganito ring katulad na provision?
Yes, Mr. President. Actually, Subic has that, AFAB, as well as CESA.
Alright, salamat, good sponsor. Just for the record, we fully expect that the position of national government agencies will be lawful rather than based on whim or caprice. Does the good sponsor agree with this representation on that?
Well, Mr. President, admittedly, this is something that's very complicated to put together because you are dealing with not only several government agencies, but also trying to maintain the autonomy of the local government. And so we are trying to balance that by having the proper representation in the board and also to make sure that the government's guarantees are not abused. And then we also have the participation now of COA to inspect and also to scrutinize the budget and expenses of this eco-zone. So, as humanly possible, within our committee, we try to put all of these safeguards. On the other hand, this committee will also appreciate any contributions from our hardworking colleague from CAPIS because we know that you're also very meticulous and there might be something that we missed, and we will appreciate anything that will be in the long run beneficial and for the good of the public.
Salamat, good sponsor. So dahil nga inaasahan naman natin na magiging lawful yung position ng mga national government agencies sa iba't ibang issue sa loob ng governing board ng Bulacan Eco Zone, bakit yung discretion ng OP sa halip na yung interpretasyon ng isang ahensya ng batas kaugnay ng mandato niya? Bakit yung discretion ng OP ang mangingibabaw? Hindi ba kung halimbawa sa principle of subsidiarity, hayaan ng OP na mag-operate yung decision-making at pati conflict resolution processes sa loob ng board, kahit sa pagitan ng isang NGA at saka yung BACSESFA?
Mr. President, ganito lang yon. The OP itself cannot outvote the majority of the BACSESFA board. So it's only when there is a conflict, like equal number within the board that is disagreeing.
No, like isang issue.
Oo, NGA at saka BACSESFA.
Okay, I'm sorry, yes. Well, Mr. President, I think I misunderstood. Okay, when there is a disagreement with an agency, is my question. Well,
Apo.
of course, it doesn't preclude anybody to raise this in court. But in the meantime, the Office of the President is given the power here to resolve it. But even if the Office of the President resolves it, let's say, in favor of whoever, BACSESFA or another party, they're not immune to any court proceedings. So doon na lang. Kasi minsan, katulad yan, merong powers din, let's say, ang MTRCB na lang yung ginagamit kung ano, to make decisions, may quasi-judicial function, so that it can already resolve issues immediately. But you can always take it to court. I mean, the MTRCB also has it under the Office of the President. There are also members of the Office of the President that are the presidential appointees to resolve anything with the MTRCB if there's a deadlock. But even with their decision, a producer can still question it in court.
Totoo naman, Mr. President, good sponsor. Hindi rin lang ako fan masyado ng pagiging masyadong litigious. So, 'di ba, kung pwede namang bawasan yung dami ng mga kaso na ihahain sa mga korte natin at mas gawing healthy na lang yung decision-making and even conflict resolution mechanisms within itong bagong body na kine-create yung BACSESFA kaugnay na mga kahit aling NGA sa loob ng executive branch na hindi pa bibigyang daan yung mas posibleng political na intervention o decision ng Office of the President. And of course, ang OP syempre ang primus inter pares sa lahat ng mga ahensya. Pero maganda rin, doon din sa prinsipyo ng subsidiarity na hayaan niya at gawin niyang mas malusog yung capacity, yung capability ng bawat NGA na makipag-deal sa BACSESFA at subukang ipanalo yung kanilang ina-argue. So, but at this point in time, Mr. President, I'd like to thank the good sponsor for answering my questions so far. I don't want to keep her tonight from a very happy celebration. But I hope I could also reserve the right to ask a few more questions after I speak with DNR officials and after hopefully within the timeline of our interpellation and debate, DOF can finally present to the Senate through our chair, through the committee, yung kanilang cost-benefit analysis.
Well,
So,
Mr. President,
yes,
I'd also like to thank our colleague here for always her good-naturedness. She's very, very calm. I guess after having been here in the Senate this long, I'm sorry that she had to witness my frustration with some government departments that are so slow in submitting. I mean, this is just a frustration I share having chaired the Committee on Public Services, where, as you know, transportation has always been such a challenge when it comes to how policies and studies are released in a timely manner by these government agencies. So, but then again, I appreciate all of the inputs of our colleague here, and I hope to be able to incorporate it in the final version of the bill. Thank you, Mr.
Maraming
President.
salamat, Mr. President, good sponsor, at walang problema sa frustration that often fuels us to do things better. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to our two distinguished colleagues. Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2572. So move, Mr. President.
Is there objection? There being none, consideration of Senate Bill number 2572 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, at this juncture and pursuant to Section 18 of the Rules of the Senate, and upon the instruction of the Chairperson of the Committee on Ways and Means, Senator Win Gatchalian, I manifest for the record the creation of a subcommittee to deliberate on House Bill number 8937, enhancing the fiscal regime for the mining industry, amending RA number 8424, and such other bills which may be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means covering the same topic with Senator Sani Angara as the chairperson. I so manifest, Mr. President.
Manifestation is noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask for a minute suspension?
Session suspended.
President, at this juncture, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, March 11, 2024. So move, Mr. President.
Paano si Mother Tongue? Okay na? Just kidding.
We again wish the husband of Senator Grace po a happy birthday, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader, there being no objection to your motion, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, March 11, 2024. Have a safe weekend, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Sa mga maiinit na balita ngayon tanghali, Pangulong Ferdinand Marcos Jr. hinimok ang Australia na